Welcome back. I'm so excited that you're here. If it's your first episode, welcome. And if you're a return listener, I'm so grateful for you. Today, we're going to talk about emotions. I feel like this is a subject that I could just riff about. No notes needed. I do have some notes, but I'll riff at times too. But I love talking about emotions. They are important, misunderstood, and they affect us so much within our relationships. So, today we're going to talk about emotional fitness and how your ability to navigate your emotion or feel your emotions impacts you and your relationships. So, before I dive into the content, if you're watching on YouTube, you might notice that I have a glow. And I want to take a moment to acknowledge my glow and thank the sun god for that glow. Last weekend, I was in Palm Springs. I spent the weekend in Palm Springs with a wonderful friend that I made within the last couple of years. And we had the best time in Palm Springs. I got to meet her boyfriend. We spent time in the sun. We ate good food. And it was just such a beautiful reminder about how and why relationships are so important. I live in Los Angeles. Palm Springs is about a 2-hour drive. It's like going to the Hamptons if you lived in New York, right? It's like getting out of the LA energy and getting into this whole other vibe. And it was about lounging and relaxation. And we had so much in common in terms of how we knew we wanted to spend our time together. And it was so easy and so wonderful. And I felt like my cup was so full and that I got to fill other people's cups. So, again, this podcast is all about relationships. And I just wanted to share an example of why relationships and having relationships in our lives that we can be fully ourselves are so important. So today's podcast is all about our emotions, all about our emotional fitness, and all about emotional intelligence personally, and then also understanding that in terms of relationships. So our emotions are generally felt, but not always understood, and they're definitely not always processed. Our emotions literally move us. They move us into action in terms of serving others, other people's needs, desires, and goals. And since many of our needs, desires, and goals are involved with or intertwined with other people, emotions are increasingly being regarded as interpersonal, meaning, we have our own emotions, but they're actually exchanged within relationships. So I think of this in terms of, if you think of the relationships in your life, think of them as food, or think of them as nutrients, or as medicine, right? Like if you think about your relationships in terms of like, am I getting the medicine that I need in my life? Like, am I getting the nourishment that I need in my life? And this concept actually came up with me and my therapist when I was in my dating journey, right? And I had met this guy, and in talking about our relationship, we started to call him tapas, in terms of like, tapas are these like small bites, like these little satiating taste testers that like taste good in the moment, but like at the end of the day, no one really wants to like fill up on tapas, right? Like you, at some point you like need a meal. And so in my life, I would liken to like what I'm offering and like what I'm giving and how I am in a relationship to being like, this farm to table, beautiful dining experience where I'm serving you what you need and I'm listening and like all the things that I offer. And this person was like giving me like these little, these little like nuggets from here and there, right? So it's really important for us to think about relationships as food because that's what they really are. And so, yes, there can be like really good food that we can eat, like my farm to table example, but it's what I have to offer might be farm to table. But somebody else like might not find that very valuable. That other person might prefer, something that's a little bit more processed. Like maybe they love Cheetos, right? And they want to build a meal around Cheetos. Like that's not really what I'm offering. So it's important for us to think about relationships in terms of this nutrient exchange and to recognize that, yes, sometimes there can be amazing nourishment, but sometimes there's some toxic stuff in there too. So there's so much conversation around toxic relationships and toxic behavior. And I think especially as women, what I see on social media and what I have also experienced and what I've done is done a lot of finger pointing, right? Of saying like, oh, they were toxic, they were this. And even when we exit relationships, I think it's really easy to throw that label on something. But as we mature in our self journey, right? This journey of self, we have to be really honest with ourselves about taking radical accountability for the things that we have done too. And so today you're going to learn more about relationships and, be able to potentially take accountability for some areas that you might be a little bit toxic at times. So in our personal relationships, we experience a really broad array of emotions. So our personal relationships, the relationships that are closest to us, they're the ones where we feel the most on the spectrum of emotions. So everything from like sadness and grief to anger to despair, sometimes maybe hate, to the other end of the spectrum, which would be like ecstasy, ultimate connection and being in creation with someone, joy and love. So we feel it all. Our close relationships activate and frustrate our needs and our desires. So if we don't have a strong relationship with ourselves or within our community, our ability to emotionally regulate is likely suffering. So what if we all became more aware of our emotions? What if we could all recognize when we were being toxic? What if we could recognize what toxic was to us and for us? The world would be in such a better place. We would all be happier, we would be healthier, and we would have better relationships that were able to support our safety and security. So this podcast is all about relationships, and ultimately emotions are at the core of our relationships. We feel a lot, we feel them often, and we feel them about everything. So relationships have a really special way of bringing up our shit. And this is why I view relationships as this beautiful place to have a sacred spiritual practice. Like, what if we really looked at every relationship as if that other person was our guide, was a God, as if they were there to really teach us something that we could be a student to, and that we could also be a teacher to. So if you approach your relationships as more of a spiritual practice, you will be more gentle and loving with your own emotional experiences. You will be more gentle and loving with your lover, and also be able to be honest with them about what you're feeling and what your frustrations are and what your needs are and how you feel like they're not performing to what you need, and be able to be open to the feedback. You'll be more able to set standards for yourself and know where you can be flexible within these standards. You're going to be more able to see your own weaknesses in addition to your amazing strengths. The reality is you have such amazing characteristics and qualities, but you have to be able to integrate your shadow. Like, what are the things that are challenging about you? We have to be able to own it. And the more secure relationships and safe relationships we'll have, those are all of the benefits of treating our relationships as if they are a spiritual practice. We're able to really accelerate our growth within ourselves if we can do it through our relationships. So when we don't fully process or own our emotional experiences, we often spew or project our emotional experiences onto other people. This is also true of our thoughts. So what the cost for not being emotionally intelligent or emotionally fit is it actually costs us energy, mental energy, time. It costs us energy. It also causes us to be stuck in our patterns, right? So if you are in one of those loops of like, oh my God, I hate feeling like this, every time I go out with somebody, this happens, and then I feel like this and I do that, and then there's got to be a way for you to break the loop. And one of the ways to do that is to be able to start to understand and your emotional fitness and use these tools to be able to expand. So the benefit of listening today is that I want to support you in creating more awareness around your emotions so that you can support your mind in being more flexible and more playful and more curious so that you can start to create more solutions within your relationships. How does that sound? Okay, you guys, so let's get to it. That's just like the intro. What are we even at for time? We're at a 12-minute intro. I think that's pretty good. Okay, so first thing we're going to do is I want to define how I view emotional fitness. So grab your journals if you've got them. If you want to use this as like a real lesson, grab your journal. Be open to this. Lesson. I want you to write down any questions that you have. Feel free to hit me up on social. Let me know if you've got questions. I'd love to offer you some feedback. And the objectives of today is I want you to better understand your emotions. I want you to better understand how that affects you in relationships. I want to give you a tool, just like I did in our last podcast, which was all about mindset. So that's a perfect partner and pairing to today's emotions and mindset. And I'm going to give you a tool. And if you stay to the end, which I hope you do, thank you. And I have some coaching questions for you. So let's dive in. So when I think of relationships, I think of the 4 bodies. I've mentioned this before, but we've got our mental body and our physical body, which are more our masculine bodies. Those are our thinking and doing. And then we have our spiritual and our emotional bodies. And those are our feminine bodies, the more connecting and the more intuiting bodies. So when we have a relationship mentally, right? There oftentimes is a physical relationship, how the relationship is expressed physically, the spiritual portion of the relationship. So what that would mean would be the why, right? Like the why you're in relationship. Well, it might be a family bond. It might be a romantic bond. It could be a friendship, right? The values around that relationship. And then there's the emotion, right? So the emotional body is what we're going to focus on today. As far as how that plays out, it's, if we're wanting to create different outcomes in relationships, which I know most people can benefit from creating better, stronger, more aligned, what I like to call juicier relationships, right? The way that we're able to get that, we have to be able to shift some of our actions. And a lot of people just want to focus on, okay, I'm going to change this behavior, right? If I change this behavior, I'll get a different outcome, right? Like, oh, I had this one specific type of guy that I always wanted to date. So if I change that, if I change the type, then I'll get something different. And the reality is yeah, maybe you might get a little bit of something different. But at the same time, if you're not addressing what your thoughts and your emotions are within that relationship, you're not really going to change that much. So the way to get sustainable changes is to really address what our thoughts and our emotions are around relationships. So again, the last episode that I did, we talked a lot about our thoughts, the common thoughts that hold us back within relationships. And today we're going to talk about the emotional patterns that hold us back in relationships. So emotional fitness is our ability to strengthen resiliency, basically to get stronger, to get more fit as we pursue positivity, so positive outcomes in our life, while we stay in alignment with our focus. So it's a lifelong practice. And the reason why I love this idea of emotional fitness so much, especially in light of its similarities to emotional intelligence, it's basically emotional intelligence. But I like to use the word fitness because fitness gives range. It gives me more depth and understanding that we can really grow. Intelligence to me is more like, oh, you kind of have it or you don't. Emotional fitness to me is a little bit more graceful. So especially since this podcast is designed specifically for women, we have to recognize and understand that within, cisgendered relationships, women tend to have a higher emotional fitness, emotional intelligence. So in my mind, that's something that we should really celebrate. And it's also something that we shouldn't judge or accost our partners for, but we can look to ourselves as really being like leaders and examples within our relationships on better ways to process our emotions. Not that we want to be our boyfriend's therapists, because we don't. So why is emotional fitness so important? And the reason why is it drives how you treat, number one, yourself, and number two, other people. So if you have low emotional fitness, then you talk to yourself like shit, and you probably talk to other people like shit. You're like constantly judging yourself. You're not good enough. You're fat, ugly, lazy, not attractive, worthless, broke, all the things. And then when you think of others, you're like, they annoy me. They're this, they're that. It's a lot of judgment. That would be a low emotional fitness. A high emotional fitness would be somebody that has the ability to perceive somebody else's emotions, right? To be able to kind of understand and sense somebody else's emotions and their own emotions. They have the ability to use their emotions, and not in terms of manipulation or control, but really more in terms of benefiting and accelerating their thinking and understanding. They also would have the ability to understand their emotions, how they're feeling in any given situation, and to be able to also be perceptive of somebody else's emotions. And then finally, high emotional fitness would also mean that this person had the ability to manage and regulate their emotions, not only their emotions, but in a secure relationship, which I will do an episode about attachment theory, but in a secure relationship, the relationship is about co-regulation, meaning you're actually able to help your partner emotionally regulate. So it's not that you would be dependent, right? Like codependent on somebody else to regulate you, but they would have a desire to support you in helping to regulate your emotions. They would see you within your own emotional experience and be able to give you support and guidance. Like, to me, when I think about relationship, that is what a beautiful way to be, right? To be in a relationship where someone saw that you were really struggling and really frustrated and was able to give you the affirmation that you needed to get through that moment. Like, that's what the goal is. So our emotions overall, I love to think about this. Our emotions are like data. right? I always tell my clients our emotions are like data for understanding yourself. So I want to define emotions for you. Like, well, okay, what are they? Like, we all feel them, but like, what the heck are they? How do I explain what an emotion is? So yes, an emotion is a feeling, but what we think of as emotions is actually the experience of energy moving through our body. So in Latin, the Latin derivative for emotion is the word emortere, which literally means energy in motion. So our emotions are energy in motion. So when I think about this, it's like a frequency that's moving through the body. So if you think about like the most joyful, like elated moments of your life, like maybe it was at the top of Machu Picchu, or when your nephew was born, or when you met your partner, or whatever that moment was for you, like how did that feel? Like how did that vibration feel in your body? And then think of the moments in life where you were just at your pits, like at the very lowest. Like, what did that feel like? Where did you feel that grief in your body? So we'll get into embodiment in another episode about how we can think about emotions and how they feel in our body. But for today, I want to share with you that our emotional energy is neutral. It's not good. It's not bad. We experience emotions different at different frequencies within our bodies. So like I said, joy is going to feel different than rage. So our emotions, again, are energy in motion, and it's important to recognize that everyone experiences emotions. Not everyone shows them, but everyone experiences them. And how you feel them is unique to you. How you express them is unique to you. And all of that is based on your life experiences. Our emotions are like waves. There's high season, there's low season, high tides, low tides. There's a cycle to our emotions. Our emotional body is our aura, right? It's the way that you show up in the world. It's the way that you vibrate. It can be felt, they say, from about 6 feet around you. So one of the things that was really interesting with the pandemic and COVID was that, we had to be 6 feet apart, which it was one of the first times that people were really in their own emotional experiences, right? Where you really had to start to feel your own things versus feeling everybody else's. We all had space. We all had time. So our emotional body is what houses and regulates our emotions. It's our nervous system. It's our hormone cycles. And like I said, it's like waves. It's also how we interpret physical touch. So another really beautiful metaphor, I think I always understand things best when I use metaphor, is that you're the blue sky. So I want you to think of yourself as the blue sky. Like it doesn't change. It's always blue, right? The sky itself is always blue, but the sky has weather. And that weather is our emotions. So, I live in Los Angeles, and I live, less than like 3 miles from the Pacific Ocean. And I'm so spoiled. I'm so grateful. Like, I love my life. I love Los Angeles, but we're really stable when it comes to temperature. And it always hasn't been like that. I lived in Minneapolis for 10 years, and the weather there isn't quite as stable. I would always call it bipolar, but you get hot and humid in the summer, and you have amazing, beautiful days. And then in the winter, there can be times where it's just like devastatingly cold and there's a polar vortex. So all of that just to say, welcome to being a human, right? Like our emotions are like the weather. So if you're wanting to better understand yourself and your emotions, you can find this resource either on my Instagram page. You can also find it on Google, but I want you to type in or look for the Wheel of Emotion. And the Wheel of Emotion is this beautiful like Wheel of Fortune wheel. And what it does is it has all of, or a lot of emotions listed on it. And it's a great resource for you to be able to understand and identify where you're at on the emotional scale, right? Like where you're at so that you can name your emotions. I do want to note that language is really important with emotions. I think it's really important for us to expand our emotional vocabulary, because the more we can speak to it specifically, it's almost like a language needle. Like these acupuncture points are released when we're better able to express ourselves. So one of the things that we do in the English language is we say, I'm angry, right? So I am angry, which, that's actually not correct. I am Jacqueline, right? Like I am a woman. I'm not. Angry is something that I'm feeling. So a new paradigm, a better way to talk about our emotions is to say, I'm feeling really angry right now, versus saying, I'm so pissed at you. It's like, it's more empowering to say, I'm feeling a lot of anger and resentment towards you right now, because it separates you from the emotion, right? The anger doesn't own you anymore. It's more about, it's something, a frequency and energy that's running through the body, and it gives you a better way to express it. So let's talk about the types of emotional energy. There's basically two. Energy is frequency. And so in the next podcast episode, I'm going to share with you the 7 different archetypes of energy that we can experience. But I want you to overall know that there's 2. There's anabolic energy, which that's constructive, expanding, fueling energy that feels really good. It actually supports growth. And then there's catabolic energy, which is draining. It's more stressful, it's resisting, and it's contracting. So again, neither one of these is right or wrong, good or bad. We need them both. And in fact, in order to create growth, you have to have spurts of catabolic energy. So if you're stuck in anabolic energy, first of all, you're spiritual bypassing. And second of all, you're not growing. So our shadow, owning this catabolic energy is utterly and vitally important. So examples of anabolic energy is love and joy and ecstasy, gratitude, appreciation. And then catabolic energy is despair and guilt and overwhelm and anxiety. Those are those lower frequency emotions. So even when you think about these emotions, I want you to think of anabolic is an opening and catabolic is a closing. So there's an opening and a restricting. Those are the 2 different types of emotions. So underneath, these lower level 1, level 2 emotions, which are those more catabolic emotions, the ones that don't feel good, there's always something that's underneath the hurt. There's an unmet desire. And so in relationship, one of our most primal desires is the need to feel safe. So if you're angry or frustrated or jealous, I can almost guarantee you what's underneath of that is like, I don't feel safe, is a lack of feeling safe or secure, right? Or feeling like I'm lacking control. And if we lack control, what does that really mean? And what that really means is that, we don't feel safe, that there's an unmet need. I'm not feeling validated. I'm not feeling seen. I'm not feeling heard. These are the things that are like so incredibly important to us. So again, neither energy is right or wrong. And I want to encourage you to think about these catabolic emotions in a different way, instead of like sitting in them and judging yourself for having them and for feeling this way. I want you to just hold these emotions and dedicate time to better understanding them, because underneath of them is really desire. It's all about desire. Underneath of them is all desire.